So the most recent episode of The Bad Batch has given us a good look at what's going on Kashyyyk following the end of the Clone Wars. The world seems to be overrun by a species known as the Trandoshans, a species with a long historic rivalry with the Wookies, and I figured today we could sort of dabble in that and take a look at the bad blood between the Wookies and the Trandoshans. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, many of us are probably pretty familiar with the Trandoshans. They actually have a long history of trouble, particularly with the Wookiees, stretching back thousands of years, but it played a role in a lot of other events in the Star Wars galaxy, including events that were depicted in the Clone Wars. So, I figured today, since it's front and center in last week's episode of The Bad Batch, it's a good opportunity to delve into the sort of history between these two species and exactly who the Trandoshans are, because they still don't show up quite as much as other species. So the Trandoshans are a reptilian species hailing from the planet Trandosia with a long history in some pretty dark practices. The Trandoshans are notable hunters, being sort of well known across the galaxy for their ability to stalk and take out prey. And because of this, they've fallen into a few very particular professions. The first being bounty hunting. Now, we actually see a lot of Trandosian bounty hunters, but one of the most well-known ones is Bossk, who was the first Trandoshan we ever saw on screen. Their ability to hunt and capture and kill prey makes them perfect bounty hunters, and we, like I said, see that quite a bit, but that's not the only thing they're well known for. You see, the Trandoshans ended up falling in pretty heavily with the slave trade, unfortunately. For a long time, they'd been traveling to nearby systems and capturing various other species and bringing them back to Trandosia. Species like, most notably, the Wookies, for example. They would then bring them back to Trandosia, and one of two things would happen. A lot of them would end up being sold to other factions across the galaxy, which would use them for more nefarious purposes. These would be factions like the Galactic Empire, for example, or other guilds that partook in species trafficking. But there was a small percentage that did end up finding a different role within Trandoshan society. You see, part of Trandoshan society was this sort of advancement to being an adult, which required Trandoshans, I believe it's just male Trandoshans, to partake in a hunt to successfully hunt and kill a prey. So, a certain portion of these captured creatures from across the galaxy were released into sort of hunting fields on their home world, where the Trandoshans would then hunt them down for sport and the sort of ability to claim their rite of passage to adulthood. This is something we see very predominantly during the Clone Wars. So, for centuries, the Trandoshans have been going to neighboring worlds, most notably Kashyyyk, and capturing local populations to release them for hunting or to sell them into slavery. This is the basis of the rivalry between the Trandoshans and the Wookiees. You see, a lot of those species that were captured and utilized were Wookiees, and the Wookiees had had a long history of dealing with the Trandoshans for this very reason. It's why we see during the events depicted in the Clone Wars that when a group of Wookiees are captured by the Trandoshans and released, a Wookiee strike team is sent to rescue them. They were so used to dealing with the Trandoshans that they had plans in place for when their own people were taken by them. Still, after the rise of the Empire, with the Empire's more lax views on some of the darker businesses within the galaxy, it became more socially acceptable for the Trandoshans to operate on Kashyyyk. Without the interference of the Republic, the Trandoshans were basically given the Imperial stamp of approval to start rounding up Wookiees and basically doing whatever they wanted with large swaths of the planet. This is what we see in The Bad Batch, where the Trandoshans are using what appear to be old separatist anti-foliage tanks to attempt to round up Wookiees and to clear out Wookiee settlements. This made heavy use of things like flamethrowers, for example, which would have been brutally effective at clearing out the dense forests on Kashyyyk. And this doesn't surprise me. The way the Empire viewed Kashyyyk following the end of the war was rather bleak, and there was likely this gap of time in sort of the early days after the war where the Empire didn't really want to clamp down on Kashyyyk quite as hard, like what we see during the events of Jedi Fallen Order, for example, and may have left that job more to local opposition forces, people and species who would have been opposed to the Wookiees to begin with, people like the Trandoshans. Still, this plays into the overall picture of what happened to Kashyyyk after the end of the Clone Wars, and if you'd like to learn more about that, I'll leave a link up here to a video I have all about what the Empire did with Kashyyyk following the end of the war. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think this makes sense. Do you think it's more viable for the Empire to just move in a ton of troops and sort of occupy Kashyyyk as a military occupation, or do you think it's understandable that they would let Kashyyyk's enemies in to do the job for them? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, leave it down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.